Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am out at the range today with a cute little .22 rifle. This is a Gevarm A6. It's one of a whole series of .22 caliber sporting rifles that were made by Gevarm, which was a rifle, like a subsidiary rifle making offshoot of the Gevelot cartridge company, which is a cartridge company that has existed in France, or had existed in France, for well over 100 years. They were one of the original factories that was making ammunition for the Gras in 1874, for example. But they continued to be an ammunition company, and they started selling rifles on the commercial market. This is a .22 caliber, .22 long rifle, and they made a number of versions of these. So they had the E1, which was a takedown rifle. That's distinctive for having a two-piece stock, because it comes apart basically right here. The fore end is one piece and the stock is separate, and it's pretty obvious that they're discrete. And then they had an A series of rifles from the A1 through, I think, the A9. This is an A6, which is distinctive because this is kind of like the basic model. It's chambered for .22 long rifle, standard cartridge. It has just a plain standard sort of front sight blade. The A3 and the A7, which are the other two models that were commonly imported into North America, you can see the difference in those because they will have a hooded front sight, and they actually have interchangeable front sight inserts. So you could have a post, you could have a little circle, a variety of different options there. This one just has a standard rear sight notch and front sight post. Now, what makes this thing unusual and distinctive is that it is incredibly simple. This is an open bolt firing semi-automatic .22, which means the bolt is actually locked open like a submachine gun almost, and when you pull the trigger, the bolt is going to go forward, fire the cartridge. It's semi-automatic, so the gas pressure pushes the bullet out that way, and it pushes back on the case, and that causes the bolt to pop back open, and then it locks in the open position, ready for you to fire a second shot. These were imported into the United States and Canada starting in the 1960s when they were under manufacture. And in the US, in the early 1980s, this sort of design, the semi-automatic open bolt, was deemed by ATF to be too easily converted into a machine gun, and so they stopped allowing the importation or manufacture of new open bolt semi-auto firearms. Now, they exempted and grandfathered pre-existing ones, and so there aren't a lot of these things. The Italians had some prototype military semi-autos that were open bolt semi. Those are grandfathered. These Gevarm rifles are grandfathered, and like the other typical category you'll see are some like early Mac 11, Mac 10, the machine pistol sort of guns that were made for the civilian market as semi-automatic open bolt. These never sold very well in the United States because they were really quite expensive. In the 60s, this would be about double the price of a Ruger 1022. So, you know, that really kind of hurts the market. The open bolt is typically something that hinders accuracy because when you pull the trigger, you have a very long lock time, meaning that first you pull the trigger and then the bolt has to actually feed a cartridge into the chamber and then fire, which means you've got this massive bolt going forward that has a much greater chance of disrupting your aim, your nice perfect hold on the target before it actually fires. A closed bolt gun, where the bolt is closed on a cartridge, and when you pull the trigger, all that has to happen is a hammer or striker firing. That happens a lot faster. There's much less mass moving around in the gun when it does happen, and so that's much more conducive to accuracy. So if you were comparing this to most of the other .22 rifle options on the market, it's not only more expensive, it's kind of harder to shoot well with. Although, like I implied, because it's a .22, the bolt's pretty light, that impact isn't nearly as significant as on larger caliber guns. So, the benefit of this, the reason that Gevarm did a design like this is it's ridiculously simple. We'll pull this apart in just a minute, but it has like 3 parts to it. The firing pin is fixed. It's actually a pair of firing pins milled into the surface of the bolt. They're not separate parts because they don't need to be. As soon as the bolt closes with a cartridge in the chamber, it immediately and automatically fires and then locks open. So you don't need a separate moving piece. There's also no extractor on it because the gas pressure from firing is enough to pull the cartridge out and cycle it, And because it's an open bolt gun, you're never in a position where you have the bolt closed on a cartridge and you need to then open the bolt and extract the cartridge. If the bolt's closed and there's a cartridge, it's fired. So I think that pretty much covers the mechanics. The one other interesting thing about this is you can actually swap it around to use high velocity or standard velocity ammunition. Now, everything that I have with me today is high velocity, so let's go ahead and do a little bit of shooting. Came with a standard 8-round magazine. They did make a 20-round magazine as well, primarily for the E1 takedown model, although I believe that magazine would be compatible with the other patterns of the rifle, but let's give it a try. And there you can see when I fire the last shot and the magazine's empty, the bolt's just going to kerchunk shut on an empty chamber, and that tells you that you're out of ammunition. Pull the magazine out and reload it. It's important to remember with a gun like this that the manual of arms on an open bolt gun is substantially different from a closed bolt. On a closed bolt gun, the magazine is not quite as important because it's possible to take the magazine out and still have a round in the chamber. That's not possible on an open bolt gun. So if you want to make an open bolt gun safe, the first thing you do is pull the magazine. So right now the bolt's closed. I'm going to open that, which makes it ready to fire. And it's totally safe here until I put the magazine in. Once the mag's in, the gun's hot. There we go. Now, I still have a round left. If I pull the magazine out, totally safed the gun. I do have a second magazine that I would like to try as well. So let's try this one. They fit in nice and easy. And that kerchunk means that I'm out. This thing's a really easy gun to shoot. I mean, it's a relatively heavy barreled 22. There's basically no recoil to it. It's really nice. Honestly, the open bolt thing isn't that big a deal with a 22. It's not a heavy bolt and it's not going very far. Where you get trouble with this is something like a 9mm or 45 caliber carbine, where you have to have a much heavier bolt in order to safely balance a blowback operating system like this. All right, so disassembly is really simple on this thing. We'll start by taking the action out of the stock, which is done with this hanger tightened screw. Just loosen that, and then the stock comes off. Now, you can see here the threaded nub that locks into the stock. To get the action apart, we're just going to unscrew the rear plug here. There is a spring inside that's going to try and jump out. Be a little careful with that. Whoop, there it goes. So that's the rear end cap. There's the spring, and we have this additional spring guide and weight. So I've been shooting high velocity ammo. So I have this in the front, like so, which means that this weight gets added to the weight of the bolt that has to get pushed backward when you're cycling. If you're only shooting standard velocity ammo, you move this to the back of the spring, and now you've reduced the weight, the reciprocating weight, so it takes less force to open the bolt. This now continues to act as a recoil spring guide, and that allows you to shoot two substantially different power levels of ammo without having to do anything particularly substantial to make the gun work. We'll take those. Now, can pull the bolt handle back and all the way back. Oh, one thing I didn't mention while we were shooting is if you push the bolt handle in while it's open, that locks the bolt in place, and that's your safety. So, however, we're going to pull it all the way to the back here, and then I can pull the bolt handle out, and then pull out the bolt itself. So if you look at the bolt face here, you'll see there's one long line, a raised ridge through the center of the bolt. That's the firing pin. So it's going to strike a crease all the way through the back of the cartridge case, which means you're hitting that primer on a rimfire cartridge. The primer is theoretically evenly distributed through, around the rim of the case. With a firing thing like this, you're going to hit that at two separate points, 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock on the case, which means you've got a lot less chance of a dud round. If you have a failure to fire in a .22 rimfire, it typically is because the priming compound wasn't evenly distributed and you managed to have a firing pin hit in a little spot that didn't have any primer compound. Well, that's a lot less likely to happen here. You'll also notice that there's no extractor because there doesn't need to be one, because you can't ever leave a cartridge in the chamber without it being fired. Now, I suppose in theory, if you did have a dud cartridge, this does create a bit of a problem because you don't have any way to manually pull it out of the chamber. What you would have to do is cock the bolt, safe the gun, take out the magazine, and then use a cleaning rod or something to carefully pop the cartridge out from the muzzle. That's not a great thing. That's the downside of having a gun that is so simple that the bolt literally is one piece. So this is it. You've got this, a spring, and a spring guide rod, and that's it for the reciprocating parts of the gun, well, I guess, and the bolt handle. I went and pulled out two of our fired cases, and you can see the crease all the way through from one side to the other from that, firing pin's not really the right word, but that is the general term. Markings we have here are primarily on the side of the barrel. The designation for this thing is simply carbine automatique, semi-auto carbine, made by Gevarm. It's in .22 long rifle, which is 5.5 millimeter caliber. Back on the barrel and the receiver, we have Saint-Étienne French proof marks. And the serial number on these guns is actually on the bottom of the barrel. So in order to find the serial number, you have to take the stock off the gun. That's important for anyone who's trying to put one of these on a federal firearms license book. And then lastly, on the opposite side of the barrel, we have made in France. These were, of course, they were made for sale in France as well as for export. Export, of course, to the United States ended by the early 1980s because these were open bolt guns. The production ended, I believe, in 1995 when Gevarm basically went out of business because of changes in French gun laws. Normally a little .22 caliber sporting, plinking target sort of gun wouldn't be all that interesting, but because of the simplicity and the open bolt nature of this one, I thought it was pretty cool, and I thought you guys might enjoy it as well. So if you do enjoy seeing this sort of thing on the net, please do consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below, and it's you guys supporting me there that makes this channel possible. Thanks for watching.